least twice a week for 3 months now. The man closest to me turned when I stepped onto the bridge, the bag in my hand. He saluted with 3 fingers to his cap like a Boy Scout. He had 2 sweaters on, one over the other, the top one blue, the one underneath white. Well, off-white. And they were both in rags. They called him Container Jan. On his hands he had fingerless mittens, or maybe they were normal gloves he had cut the fingers off. I had seen newspaper boys do the same. These ones were an unexpected reddish color, pink almost. "Any bites?" I said. He didn't answer, but smiled and pointed to the newspaper he had spread out on the ground by his feet. On it were a medium-sized cod and 2 mackerel, one still wriggling. He winked with his left eye and raised his right hand and flashed 5 fingers 3 times. "In 15 minutes, I said with a low whistle. A plastic bag had been tossed up against the railings. ICA, co-op, whatever. It wasn't his, that's for sure. And 2 scrunched-up paper cups likewise tossed, and a light-colored paper napkin smeared with ketchup and mustard. And further up a tangled mess of lousy fishing line. Container Jan coughed a few times with a mitten covering his mouth, and it was an ominously hollow sound, and he turned and said into the darkness, "Damn foreigners, fishing during daytime." I walked past him and stopped between 2 suspension cables. Each stretch between 2 cables had been given a number. This was the 9er. Then I loosened the last hook from the rig and pulled out 1/2 meter of line and leaned over the railings. With a few clumsy twists of my wrist, I let the line with the weight on the end slowly unwind from the bait rig and into the water. Around the top of each hook I had wound a bit of shiny red tape. When my uncle did some serious fishing a little further south from here, in the Bunafjord, not far from Roald Amundsen's house, in a rowing boat he had hired free and for nothing, he always used mussels as bait. He wanted salt water to fish in. This was right at the beginning of the 1960s, and he drove for miles and miles in the gray Volvo PV to walk in his high waders in the shallows out by Bekensten Key. With the shiny surface of the water only just below the tops of his boots, and his shirt sleeves rolled up in a vain attempt to keep them dry each time he bent over to catch the mussels and put them in a bucket cut in half that was floating in front of him. But all this was too much trouble for me, and I certainly didn't go anywhere near the distance he did to get his bait, and the fish didn't bite any different for me than they did for my uncle back in those days. "You don't need bait," the others on the bridge said. "They'll go for anything shiny." I fixed a wheel hub I got off a bike to the railings, using mudguard struts to secure it firmly around the top handrail. It was called a windlass. That kind of device. And it was usually attached to the gunnel of fishing boats, and you could probably buy it in a shop if you wanted, but this was my personal patent. I placed the fishing line in the groove, and in that way I could gently raise or lower it without the line wearing thin on the railings, until eventually it snapped with a loud crack, which of course had happened to general amusement. Day was slowly breaking. I had been standing there for more than 2 hours and hadn't had a single bite. It annoyed me. But frankly, fish wasn't my favorite dish anymore. Not like it was in the past. The fish I did catch I always gave away. As a rule, I drove home before the first cars came down the hill towards the bridge. But today I had frittered my time away. I hadn't even started to pack my bag, and the cars that were coming were classy cars, expensive cars. I turned my back to the road, my frayed navy blue reefer jacket wrapped tightly around me. I'd had that jacket ever since I was a boy in Merck, and only one of the old brass buttons was still intact, and I had a woolen cap on as blue as the jacket, pulled down over my ears so from behind I could have been anyone. I tied the bait rig to the railing, turned round and crouched down to take a cigarette from the pack I had in my bag. I really ought to stop smoking. I had started to cough in the mornings. It was a bad sign. And then a car stopped right in front of me with the window on the driver's side level with my face. I had the cigarette between my lips, and as I stood up I lit it with a match behind my cupped hand. I always used matches. I didn't like that plastic. It was a gray Mercedes, brand new, and the paintwork was shiny as skin can be shiny at certain times, in certain situations. Then the window slid down without a sound. "It's Jim, isn't it?" he said. I knew him at once.